Is Not This Real? An essay by Joseph M. Spencer. Published in BYU Studies Quarterly, Volume 58, Issue 2. For a fully annotated version of this article, see byustudies.byu.edu. Is knowledge superior to faith? In today's world, is it possible to know anything with certainty? Joseph M. Spencer explores these questions in his analysis of Alma's confrontation with Korihor and Alma's later teachings on faith. See chapters 30 through 33 and chapter 36 in the Book of Alma.
Latter-day Saints often take Korihor, the infamous Nephite Antichrist, to be a fool, someone perhaps rightly struck dumb for stupidly demanding signs when he knew better. After all, he self-contradictorily trusted an angel who told him that there is no God. See Alma chapter 30, verse 53. One popular commentary remarks, "Wickedness does not promote rational thought." Such an approach to Korihor is good fun, perhaps, but it fails to comprehend Korihor's place in the Book of Mormon. Presumably, his voice is present in the narrative for a reason. Should we not assume that Mormon, as author of the Book of Alma, wishes us to reflect on Korihor's critique of Nephite Christian faith? We are presented with Korihor's own words in Alma 30, despite the fact that these words led many Nephite Christians into serious spiritual error. True, as we read on, we are told of Korihor's unseemly demise and reminded by Mormon that such is the end of him who perverteth the ways of the Lord. See Alma chapter 30, verse 60. But this end result does not, I think, lessen the fact that Mormon gives us Korihor's actual words and arguments. It seems we are being asked to think through them. Not only are we being asked to think through Korihor's words, but we are arguably also being asked to watch as Alma thinks through them. As I will show, it seems Alma is at first caught off guard by Korihor, and that it takes him a while to sort out how to respond to the critique. Though God gets involved in the situation with Korihor, which settles affairs to some degree, see Alma chapter 30, verses 49 through 50, this resolution does not seem to leave Alma settled in his mind and spirit. And so he works out a complex response to Korihor's critique over the course of several chapters. In the following pages, I wish to probe Korihor's appraisal of Nephite Christian devotion, sorting out the basic stakes of his argument, and then I wish to look at how Alma slowly and belatedly develops a full response to Korihor. Before beginning in earnest, I should explain briefly why I believe this analysis is worth pursuing. The question at the heart of the exchange between Korihor and Alma concerns knowledge, what Alma calls the real. See Alma chapter 32, verse 35. And this question of knowledge seems to be a concern many in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have right now. Is it really possible to know the truth of the restoration? Some skeptically ask if people just talk about knowing religious truths because they're either naive or opportunistic, either following blindly without having asked any hard questions, or being consciously inauthentic to get along in a culture that is obsessed with certainty. Is there any space today for knowledge, especially in religious contexts? Well, let us begin with Korihor. According to the text, Korihor's critique of Nephite Christian devotion derives from a kind of cynicism. That is, behind his more strictly philosophical criticisms lies a suspicion that the whole of Nephite Christianity was created by ancient priests who sought power and authority, ultimately in the hopes of getting gain. See Alma chapter 30, verse 23. These priests, he claims, figured out that they could prevent people from enjoying their rights and privileges or making use of that which is their own by providing a system of ordinances and performances overseen by individuals with immense social capital, people others would be naturally afraid to offend. See chapter 30, verses 23 and 27 through 28. What corruptly shields these priests from criticism, according to Korihor, is a set of unverifiable things: traditions, dreams, whims, visions, and pretended mysteries. See chapter 30, verse 28. Such is Korihor's institutional critique of Alma's church. Now, it strikes me as deeply interesting that Alma does not bother himself much with these accusations, though they apparently lie at the root of Korihor's attitude. Alma dismisses them as untrue with a simple wave of the hand. See chapter 30, verses 34 through 35. What interests Alma, it seems, is not Korihor's institutional critique, especially when it sets forth its own unverifiable claims. In Alma's view, all this is apparently superficial, and so he gives his attention primarily to Korihor's philosophical criticisms about whether Nephite Christian claims are true and how one comes to know the truth. He addresses these issues in detail and at length. I want, though, to pause for a moment on the fact that Alma prioritizes questions of knowledge over questions of authority, on the fact that he privileges philosophical questions over what might be called ethical questions. This prioritization seems noteworthy for today's context because the past decade or so has seen, in the larger culture surrounding the church, an inversion of Alma's priorities. In other words, at least from my own observation, those struggling with, or in fact leaving the church tend, let me emphasize that this is only a tendency, to begin with and seldom get beyond suspicions about the ethical nature of the institution. I refer here not only to worries about the church's stance on certain political or social issues, but also to the oft-asserted claim that the church has hidden historical or financial information from its membership. I do not mean to deny that such concerns are important, but I think I have often felt like Alma when encountering these concerns. It seems to me that most such questions about the church as an institution are only important if one begins from the conviction that there is something real at work in the restoration. Truth first, ethics later. This is the position I see Alma taking. He wants to address matters of truth and knowledge, and then, if necessary, and heaven knows it is necessary, we can discuss institutional ethics. For the purposes of this essay, then, I wish to follow Alma's lead and move right to the heart of the matter. Whether and how one can know the truth. What are Korihor's real criticisms? Korihor seems to direct two precise points of criticism toward Nephite Christian devotion. What allows the reader to identify them is a bit of repetition. Twice, Korihor speaks of things he calls foolish, and twice he raises questions about what one can know. First, he says that Nephite Christians are guided by a foolish and a vain hope. See chapter 30, verse 13. Second, he says that they trust the foolish traditions of their fathers. See chapter 30, verse 14. Note how Korihor's critiques point in opposing temporal directions. In hope, one looks to the future, while tradition comes to a person from the past. Consequently, Korihor offers two distinct but related objections. Regarding hope, he claims that no man can know of anything which is to come. See chapter 30, verse 13. Future events are, by definition, unknowable. They are unavailable to present empirical experience. And regarding tradition, he claims that one cannot have knowledge with any surety, since he cannot know of things which he do not see. See chapter 30, verse 15. One cannot be certain about an account of a past event, since its very pastness hides it from present empirical experience. Here, then, we have two objections, but they converge on one overarching issue: knowledge. Note that Korihor sees a connection between tradition and hope, between foolish adherence to tradition and foolish anticipation of things to come. Ye look forward to Christ, he says, but this is the effect of a frenzied mind, and this derangement of your minds comes because of the traditions of your fathers. See chapter 30, verse 16. Naive adherence to tradition distorts one's thinking, and only such distorted thinking could allow a person to think that the future is decided and clear. Here, then, is Korihor's critique of Nephite Christian devotion. First, he does not like that its point of departure is tradition. So many reports handed down over centuries regarding extraordinary experiences and events about which one cannot be certain because they lie inaccessibly in the past. See chapter 30, verse 14. Second, he does not like that Nephite Christians derive hope from these uncertain traditions, a blind sense of security about the future that, by definition, cannot be known. From Korihor's perspective, then, either Christians unwisely believe that they have knowledge when they do not, the assumption being that knowledge derives primarily from direct experience, or they are consciously oriented by something other than knowledge, such as faith, when they ought to be oriented by knowledge. Korihor thus presents to Nephite Christians a kind of dichotomy. Either you are deluded because you think you know what you definitely do not know, or you are deluded because you knowingly orient yourself to something other than knowledge. Either way, Nephite Christians are foolish, frenzied, and deranged. Now that we have a clearer understanding of Korihor's critique, we can now straightforwardly state what Alma must do if he wishes to address Korihor's critique directly. He can 1. Defend the idea that one can know the truth about traditional claims, or 2. Explain why something other than knowledge, such as faith, is preferable as a point of orientation. On the one hand, as I will argue, he contends that Korihor has a fetishistic relationship to knowledge that is deeply problematic and that faith is a better place to start and end than knowledge. Thus, he will effectively displace knowledge as a core value, arguing, in fact, that faith not only is not lesser than knowledge, but also goes beyond knowledge and produces something of infinitely more value. On the other hand, he will also argue that one nonetheless can know the truth of the Christ tradition, know it, in fact, perfectly. I want to trace both of Alma's points here. I would like to make a preliminary point first, however. Strange as it may seem, Alma does not offer his double response to Korihor's critique until after Korihor's death. Alma offers an immediate response to Korihor's onslaught in Alma 30, but he later develops a fuller and, in my view, more mature response in Alma 32. From the perspective of the later response, Alma may be said to offer only a weak defense when talking with Korihor in person. This is perhaps disappointing in a certain way, but Alma's experience is a common one. All too often, it is only when it is already too late that we figure out what we should have said in a socially complicated situation. This was apparently the case for Alma on this occasion. Although many have been deeply impressed and inspired by Alma's in-person exchange with Korihor, others may well wonder whether the exchange is fully satisfying, especially in a 21st century context. Initially, Alma says just that he knows both that there is a God and also that Christ shall come. See Alma chapter 30, verse 39. How does he justify this bold claim? First, he makes a rhetorically clever move that nonetheless will never convince someone like Korihor. Alma says, "And now what evidence have ye that there is no God, or that Christ cometh not? I say unto you that ye have none, save it be your word only." See chapter 30, verse 40. This statement is certainly true, and maybe it keeps Korihor honest to some degree. He does, in fact, retreat a bit, qualifying his criticism. But such a rhetorical move will never convince an atheist or agnostic that someone can know spiritual truths with any certainty. Alma then goes further, stating, "I have all things as a testimony that these things are true." See chapter 30, verse 41. He explains, "All things denote there is a God, yea, even the earth, and all things that are upon the face of it, yea, and its motion, yea, and also all the planets which move in their regular form, do witness that there is a supreme Creator." See chapter 30, verse 44. Here, Alma offers a positive argument in his defense, but again, such an argument is unlikely to persuade an atheist, or even an agnostic, especially in the 21st century. A believer naturally and rightly sees God's hand in the order of the universe, but unbelievers are seldom swayed by this kind of argument. In other words, what Alma offers in response to Korihor within Alma 30 is an interesting defense of the faith he himself already has, but it is not a satisfying reason to begin believing. The response certainly does not work on Korihor, who persists in disbelief until he has direct empirical evidence of God's power. Though, even then, Alma is left with the impression that Korihor has not changed his mind. See chapter 30, verses 54 through 55. And of course, today any argument from design, as arguments like Alma's from Alma 30 are usually called, is even less likely to compel belief because there are perfectly satisfying scientific explanations for the ordered nature of the universe. It thus seems that Alma lacks a fully developed defense when he first confronts Korihor's skepticism. Really, he seems surprised at Korihor's belligerent atheism, which is unprecedented in recorded Nephite history. He counters his foe with a description of the orderliness in creation, which he, as a believer, sees as divine, but he does not yet have a way of explaining to someone like Korihor how a non-believer might come to know the truth of a religious tradition. Before moving on, I wish to make clear that I do not mean to cast aspersions on Alma by gently criticizing his immediate response to Korihor. I think the text suggests that Alma himself felt he needed to develop and elaborate on this first response. 2 chapters later, when Alma finds himself preaching among the Zoramites, he seems still to be thinking about Korihor, still attempting to work up a complete response to Korihor's critique. The second he begins speaking to an eager audience of the Zoramite poor, he speaks of many who do say, "If thou wilt show unto us a sign from heaven, then we shall know of a surety, then we shall believe." See chapter 32, verse 17. Alma takes his opportunity to preach as an occasion, in part to work out a better answer to Korihor, who is already dead. Alma apparently thinks Korihor's questions need better answers than what he provided before this point, and he has evidently developed what he considers to be better responses. Thus, although the Zoramite poor do not approach Alma in the same faithless way as Korihor, Alma, as it were, asks them to sit down and listen to the sermon he wishes he could go back and give to Korihor. Let us now take a look at Alma's more mature response to Korihor's critique, found in Alma 32 rather than in Alma 30. Alma 32 is, of course, a chapter with which Latter-day Saints are generally familiar. We are not, however, familiar enough with it, in my view. I say that for a specific reason. My experience is that Latter-day Saints tend to read Alma 32 as being about how faith is preparatory to and eventually replaced by knowledge. When I ask students or average church members about Alma 32, their spontaneous response suggests that they read it as a treatise on how a lesser intellectual state, faith, eventually gives way to a greater intellectual state, knowledge. I think this is a mistaken reading, which I will try to show. Alma 32 famously contains a parable of sorts about what it means to have faith. Now, Alma says, we will compare the word unto a seed. See chapter 32, verse 28. Here already one must be careful. Thanks in part to a popular primary song, there is a common view of this text that is mistaken, a view expressed when people speak of planting a seed of faith. But what Alma compares to a seed is not faith. It is the Word. Although Alma will speak of faith being increased or of it growing up in the course of his discussion, see chapter 32, verse 29, the point of his parable is not to illustrate how faith grows from something small into something great. What grows into a plant, and then into a tree, is the Word. Faith in Alma's discourse is just the trust that one places in the seed's potential goodness and then later in its actual goodness. Alma appears to be less interested in encouraging his hearers to develop more or stronger faith than in clarifying what faith in the Word looks like. Faith's first task, according to Alma, is to plant the seed in what he calls an experiment. See chapter 32, verse 27. He hopes that, at first, his hearers can simply believe in a manner that they can give place for the Word. See chapter 32, verse 27. But what does the Word refer to? God, Alma explains, imparteth his word by angels. See chapter 32, verse 23. And what is it that angels announce? Alma urges his hearers to begin to believe in the Son of God and the plan of salvation. See chapter 33, verse 22. And states his desire that they shall plant this word in their hearts. See chapter 33, verse 23, emphasis added. The word or seed is thus the angelic announcement of the Son of God's atoning work. However, this may actually come to an individual. Note that the word comes to Alma's hearers through him rather than directly through angels. That is, of course, how most of us receive the word. This is a point to which I will return. Thus, what Alma asks first is that, with faith, his hearers give some space for the word. Can we trust it enough to try and experiment with it? Only once we have done that, Alma explains, can we start to track what happens and therefore make a responsible decision regarding the word's goodness. Here is what is supposed to happen. If it be a true seed, or a good seed, says Alma, behold, it will begin to swell within your breasts. See chapter 32, verse 28. If the seed is good, it will swell. This is what good seeds do when planted. Moisture in the soil causes a seed to swell before it then sprouts and begins to grow. Alma claims that this metaphorical swelling is something one can feel. It has an immediate and undeniable effect on us. When you feel these swelling motions, he says, ye will begin to say within yourselves, it must needs be that this is a good seed. See chapter 32, verse 28. Notice that Alma says that honest observers of their own unmistakably internal experiences will start talking to themselves. They will conclude for themselves that the seed is good. Why? It swelleth and sprouteth and beginneth to grow. See chapter 32, verse 30. Which is what every good seed does. A sensible person, therefore, recognizing what is happening, will naturally conclude that they have encountered a good seed. That is the metaphor in the parable, as Alma says so simply. If a seed groweth, it is good. See chapter 32, verse 32. Now comes the key moment. Alma asks, are ye sure that this is a good seed? See chapter 32, verse 31. His answer is simple and affirmative. Absolutely. Because a person is absolutely sure that the seed is good, he says, ye must needs know that the seed is good. See chapter 32, verse 33. Here is the key word, know. Having tried the experiment, one knows. Alma next asks if such knowledge is perfect. See chapter 32, verse 34. And he again, perhaps against our expectations this time, answers in the affirmative. Yea, your knowledge is perfect in that thing. See chapter 32, verse 34. Here Alma speaks of perfect knowledge, of sure knowledge, of apparently undeniable knowledge. He adds the following rhetorical question. Oh, then, is not this real? See chapter 32, verse 35. Alma believes that anyone undertaking this experiment will have an experience of something real, of something indelible, of something that resists mere subjective interest. Here, Alma sees the dawn of very real knowledge, of an actual and discernible encounter with something, in fact, reproducible and verifiable. It is worth reflecting, at least briefly, on the kind of knowledge at stake here. Alma elsewhere distinguishes between different kinds of knowledge, separating out, for example, temporal from spiritual knowledge, or knowledge that is of the carnal mind from knowledge that is of God. See chapter 36, verse 4. As for the sort of knowledge he has in mind in Alma 32 and in Alma 36, it appears to be akin to what we would today call aesthetic knowledge. This distinction seems clear from the fact that he ties knowledge directly to taste. At the very moment he speaks of the real, he says that experience of it amounts to having tasted it. See chapter 32, verse 35. He speaks in a similar fashion in Alma chapter 36, verse 26. Many have been born of God, and have tasted as I have tasted. Therefore they do know of these things of which I have spoken, as I do know. Philosophers have long spoken of taste, not only as one of the five senses, but also as the taste that one cultivates as a peculiar sort of knowledge. As one thinker recently summed up the tradition, taste simultaneously concerns an excess of knowledge that is not known, but that presents itself as pleasure, and an excess of pleasure that is not enjoyed, but that presents itself as knowledge. Tasting something that is sweet above all that is sweet, see chapter 32, verse 42, is an excessive experience, one that overflows the categories of understanding, but that, in a way, nonetheless produces a kind of knowledge. One develops a taste for religious truth, and one knows that it is good. Alma is certainly convinced that the taste one develops for the word is a form of real knowledge. But let us be clear. What one knows, surely and perfectly, is pretty limited, according to Alma. He qualifies his talk of perfect knowledge with the phrase, "in that thing." See chapter 32, verse 34. One can know something in an absolute way, but all that Alma says we can know is just this one thing, that the seed is good. Beyond that, does the person involved in an experiment like this know anything perfectly? Note that Alma himself raises this question. Is your knowledge perfect? He asks, apparently with reference to things apart from the seed's goodness. See chapter 32, verse 35. This time, he answers negatively. See chapter 32, verse 36. Apparently, we know nothing apart from the seeds being good or not being good. That is all we know. But again, let us be clear. A person can know that one thing, according to Alma, and know it perfectly, surely, and really. We have a foundation, a foothold. We know little, but we do know something. And Alma claims that this little bit of knowledge will spur us to keep working, encouraging the word to grow. Ye will say, "Let us nourish the seed with great care, that it may get root, that it may grow up and bring forth fruit unto us." See chapter 32, verse 37. This kernel of knowledge, minimal but sure, is enough to mobilize one's efforts with the seed. It is enough to solidify one's faith. Here is the interesting thing. Alma says knowledge mobilizes one's further exercise of faith. When he asks if the experimenter's knowledge is perfect in general, rather than just in that thing, he answers, "Nay, neither must ye lay aside your faith." See chapter 32, verse 36. Here, crucially, faith goes beyond knowledge. Faith's first efforts, in fact, yield a bit of knowledge, but it is minimal, just enough to spur us to invest our faith in the Word in a genuinely productive way. Knowledge, we might say, dawns early rather than late in the experiment, and it arrives primarily so that we will get to work seriously on the seed, or the Word. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, yes, we've got to keep working because we've got only a bit of knowledge. And faith needs to keep experimenting until our knowledge in general becomes perfect. We don't lay aside faith once we've got a bit of knowledge, true, but that's because there's a lot more knowledge to come. But here we must slow down and look carefully at the text. From this point to the end of the chapter, Alma never again speaks of knowledge. Faith continues beyond knowledge, that is, beyond knowledge of the seed's goodness, but not because it aims at producing more knowledge or more general knowledge. It apparently aims at something else. And what does it aim at? Alma is perfectly clear about this. Faith aims at life, at eternal life. Alma is explicit on this score. When he speaks of what to anticipate from the seed, he refers to the fruit of the tree of life. See chapter 32, verse 40. He further says, "If ye will nourish the word, looking forward to the fruit thereof, it shall take root. And behold, it shall be a tree springing up unto everlasting life." See chapter 32, verse 41. Echoing Lehi's famous dream about the tree of life, he also promises this, "By and by ye shall pluck the fruit of this tree, which is most precious, which is sweet above all that is sweet, and which is white above all that is white, yea, and pure above all that is pure." See chapter 32, verse 42. Here, then, is what faith beyond knowledge aims at. It does not strive for more knowledge. It strives toward life, life eternal. Knowledge is, in Alma's parable, a crucial but ultimately brief moment occurring early in the long road of faith. It is also focused on just one tiny but essential detail, whether or not the seed that one plants is good. Then knowledge fades into the background as one chases after the good life, the life whose goodness is signaled by the goodness of the seed that grows into a tree of life. One hungers for life rather than for knowledge. Let me pause here to highlight, for a moment, Alma's theological brilliance. Alma has laid out a path that begins with eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, the tree that gives knowledge specifically of good and evil. But then the path leads to a tree of infinitely greater value, the tree of life. Although he does so subtly, Alma seems to build his whole parable as a sustained reflection on the two trees in Eden. Incidentally, I think that the common reading of Alma 32, which regards faith as inferior in some way to knowledge, and therefore assumes that the parable is about progress from faith to knowledge, makes it impossible to see Eden's two trees clearly. Alma thus places his listeners and us as readers on a path that leads from the real effects of eating from Eden's first tree. Its effect in this context is that we can know perfectly whether the angelic announcement